Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video. Now today we're going to be installing these Cquence rotors and PowerStop carbon fiber brake pads on this 435 F33. Stay tuned. Hey everyone, I'm Steve and you're watching F33. Now if you find this video helpful, be sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe. Now before I start talking about how to install these brakes, I want to tell you what kind of brakes come on a 435 and why I chose these. So from the factory, when you get a 435, you have a couple brake options. You have the standard 435 brakes, which use just regular BMW calipers. And then when you upgrade to the M Sport package, you'll get 4-piston Brembo brakes up in the front, but you'll retain the stock BMW brake calipers in the rear. Now, when you upgrade to the M Sport M Performance brakes, that's when you get the 4-piston calipers in the front and 2-piston Brembo calipers in the back. The rotors actually also changed to 370 millimeters, which require a minimum of an 18-inch rim. These rotors are really, really big. So now let me tell you about why I chose the Cquence brakes. Now these brakes come out of California. They are custom drilled by Cquence, and you can get them in a variety of patterns. On the website when you're ordering, you can choose from Phantom, Blade, and Blade 2. Now the ones that I chose for my car, I wanted to be a little bit different. I see a lot of people doing the drilled and slotted where there's more of a sweeping motion altogether. That's the Phantom. The Blade 2 is just the slots and they're bi-directional like you see here. And then you have the Blade, which has the drilled and slotted that are bi-directional. I thought it looked kind of cool. I don't see a lot of people do that. Now, what I like about these Cquence brakes is you can have them drill whatever pattern you want. So if you want your name on there, you want your channel name on there, you want a design or a logo on there, you can do that. They'll drill it out. They usually drill it the same day, depending on what time you do your order. And as I said, again, these are made in America. They're drilled in California and then shipped out. So depending on where you're at, shipping times will vary. Now these are double ground, which improve performance and the brake bedding process. All the drilled sections of the rotor are countersunk, and why that's important is that it helps alleviate any cracking in the rotor. You may have seen online or on websites or things like that when you're looking at brakes, and people will say, oh, don't get the drilled rotors because they'll crack. Well, they will on cheap rotors. However, the nicer rotors, they actually countersink them, which kind of helps alleviate some of the pressure and stresses on the rotor and limits the cracking that happens. The slots are really good for taking away the gas and the debris that the brake pads produce when they're braking. Now, slots do wear down your brake pads a little quicker. You know, there's an extra friction surface on the brake rotor. And so, yes, you will go through brake pads a little quicker, but it's not gonna be, 6 months compared to a year or a year compared to 2 years. It's not, half-lifing your brake pads by any means. One thing that I also like about these rotors is that they are coated. So you can see that the hats and then also inside the venting, it's all coated. So you're not gonna get any rust developing on these rotors, which is really, really great. Now, if we step over and talk about the brake pads that I chose the PowerStop Extreme. Now these are carbon fiber ceramic brake pads. These are really, really great. If you don't want any dust on your wheels, like I don't want any dust on my wheels, it's a pain in the butt to clean. These are the pads for you. Normal ceramic pads, they produce very little dust. These carbon fiber ceramic brake pads produce almost zero dust. and they're really great on braking. The carbon fiber helps alleviate some of the heat that's produced by the pads and brings it away from your rotor. They also have a backing plate on these brake pads that also reduces the heat and takes it away from the pad and the rotor. Really, really great setup. When you order these, they do come with the needed hardware, so they do have the retaining clip and the pins, so that you have everything that you need. One other thing about these rotors, the buying experience was really, really great. I started instant messaging with Billy over at Cquence, and what he did was he verified, this is the kind of car I had, these are the kind of brakes I had, and made sure that I was actually getting the right brakes for my car. A lot of times when you're looking online at different parts, you're thinking, well, the website says that these are for my car, but in the description it's not really listed for mine, and so you start questioning your purchase. Speaking to Billy was really comforting. He let me know these are the exact brakes that I needed. One thing that you will need to purchase separately are the brake-wear sensors. So there are 2 brake-wear sensors on the car, one on the driver's side front and one on the passenger side rear, and those will tell you, give you some sort of indication when your brakes need to be replaced. So you will need to purchase those separately. They're not very expensive. They're a couple of bucks, and I'll put a link down below in the description on where you can find them. And all the parts today and tools used, I will provide links down below in the description so that you can purchase them for your 435. All right, so I think that's about it. Let's get started on the install. So now before we start taking the caliper off, we actually want to open the brake reservoir so that we don't build up too much pressure. It can release a little pressure as we spread the caliper. So what we want to do is underneath this panel on the driver's side, we're going to take a 10 millimeter and just loosen up these plastic nuts. And then this is just going to pull off. We can put it to the side. And here's your brake reservoir. We're just going to open that up. Now don't take this off completely. Just leave it so that pressure can be released because we don't want anything falling in there, okay? So the first thing that we're going to want to do before we can take the caliper off, before we can take the rotor off, is to actually punch out the pins that are holding the retaining clip in that holds the brake pads in. So now this is a 1/8 punch. All right, and you want to be really, really careful because these are powder coated. You don't want to scratch them. So there's these little pins, and you're going to push from the front, and they're going to come right out the back. And there's 2 of them. Okay, and once you get them most of the way out, you can just use your fingers, and you'll want to push in on the retaining clip so that you can pull them out. And this is what they look like. And here is your retaining clip. So essentially how these fit is the retaining clip fits on the caliper like this, and then these pins drive in and hold it just like that. So you're driving the pin out, and then the retaining clip is loosened. All right, now on the back of the caliper, there's 2 18 millimeter bolts. Now these bolts may be difficult to remove. I know I had to apply a great amount of force to them to get them off. But there's one up at the top here, and if you feel around where the caliper is, you can feel where that bolt is. There's one on the top and one on the bottom. Now these bolts back here took a lot of force to get off. I'm not gonna lie. I need a little help. But I did get them broken free. So we'll just remove them the rest of the way here. All right, so what we want to do is we want to spread the pads away from the rotor so that we can get them out. When we put in the new pads, they're obviously going to be a lot larger. Now I'm using a caliper spreader. If you don't have something like this, you can use a C-clamp, or you can even use your hands to go back and forth. It's going to take a little bit longer, and this is a little bit easier. So with a caliper spreader, we just put it in between here and start squeezing, and you want to go slow. All right, now we're at the end. Okay, and we will just pull out our pads. Now, my pads in the front were not that bad. They were still relatively new, so I'm going to hold on to these in case I want to reuse them. My back pads are the ones that are should be wearing down. Now you'll notice that this one's actually connected by a cable, and this is the brake wear sensor. You're going to want to replace this sensor when you do your brake pads. So this just basically clips right into the back of the pad. So I'm going to unclip it here. There we go. And now this brake wear sensor, you'll see it here. It's just clipped in to these little brackets. Okay, and then there's this little door back here that you can open up, and it is just plugged right in. All right, how to remove this is there's actually a little clip here, and you're just going to want to press right in back, and it's going to release this from the plug. All right. So your rotor is held on by a 6mm Allen. So we're just going to go in here. We're going to loosen it up. Now yours may be on there tight. Mine was not. So we're just going to loosen it up here. You can see it's a really short nut. Now if your rotor is on tight, you might want to take something like a rubber mallet or something and just kind of pound on it. There we go. And it will come right off. Now this one doesn't look too bad. There's a little bit of scoring on it, but overall it's in really good shape. Now before we put the new rotor on, we're going to want to clean this off. This one's not too bad, but we still want it to be nice and smooth. We don't want any rust on there. So we're going to use a little brake clean and some wire brushes to clean off the hub. Now be sure that if you have these M Performance calipers that you do not get any brake clean on them. These are powder coated, and the brake clean will destroy the powder coating. So you want to be really careful when you're using this not to get it on there. We're just going to go through and clean this all off. Make sure that when you do this, afterwards, you get in here where the threads are so that you don't have any debris in there when you're screwing in. All right, now that we have the hub all clean, we want to get the caliper clean so that we can put the new pads in. So I'm just going to use a little WD-40 and one of these soft brushes, and it does the trick. All right, before you put this on, ensure that you clean the rotor with some brake clean to make sure that there's no debris or anything like that from the milling process when they drill these. All right, so we are just going to put this locking rotor nut in. All right, once we have this on here, we're going to torque it down to 16 Newton meters. There we go. It's not a whole lot, but we just want to make sure that we get it torqued down to the right spec. All right, so before we put our caliper on, we need to grease both the caliper pistons inside the caliper and the back of the pads and the sides. Be very careful not to get any grease on the pads themselves. We want these to stick, not slide around. Okay, so the grease that I'm going to be using is Liqui-Moly anti-squeal paste. We're just going to put some on the back here. You don't need to put a ton. All right, so now that we have the pads greased, we want to grease our caliper. So now the parts that we want to grease are right here. They're the sliders where the brake pad is going to go in and out, and then also the rings here, the piston rings. So again, we don't need a ton. We just need enough that it's going to be where the pad rubs. All right, so now before we put the caliper on the rotor, we're going to want to just slide the pads in. Now we're not going to shim the pads in. We're not going to tighten the pads in right away, but we just want to make sure none of this grease gets on the rotor itself. So we're just going to take the caliper bolts here and mount the caliper. We don't need to tighten it down yet. We're just doing this to hold the caliper in place so that we can put the pins in and the brake wear sensor. All right, now before we lock these in place, lock the pads in place, we want to connect our new brake wear sensor. Okay, so we're just going to pop it in here, make sure it's connected firmly. This connection is just going to fit right back in that box just how it did before. All right, we're going to close that up. And then just go ahead and hook the cable into the little brackets just like the other one was connected. And you're going to see a little notch on the pad. And I'm going to take this pad out here so I can show you. There's a notch right there. And that's where the brake wear sensor is going to go. All right, so now to lock it in place, it uses these pins, and then it also uses a clip. Now we're going to want to make sure that we put some anti-squeal grease on both the clip and the pins. Now what I like to do is put one of the pins in first, and that kind of helps seat the retaining clip. And this pin goes through, there's some holes in the pads that you'll notice, and the pin will slide through those holes to lock the pad in place. And so we're just going to put some grease here on the clip, everywhere that metal is going to touch. All right, and then we're just going to use a little hammer to finish it off and get that pin in place. Now you're going to want to make sure that the back of the pin is flush with the back of the caliper. All right, and that's it. All right, now that we have everything in place, we just need to torque down this caliper. Now it's going to be a little difficult to get in here, but you can do it. Just takes a little finagling. We're going to need to torque it down to 50 Newton meters. All right, there's one. All right, there we go. All right, there we go. We are all torqued down. We're just going to straighten the wheel here so that we can put the tire on, and the front will be done. All right, so now we're going to want to torque these down to 105 foot-pounds. Make sure to do your star pattern. All right, and that is it. That, I gotta say, looks amazing. It's so much more aggressive than the stock flat rotors. All right, so now that you've gotten the brake pads and rotors installed, what you're gonna wanna do is perform the brake bedding process. So what that involves is, with ceramic brakes, it involves putting some of the adhesion that's on the brake pad itself onto the rotor. And the way ceramic brakes work is they actually use the adhesion during high braking to slow the pad down instead of only friction. So the brake bedding process involves you heating up the brakes and transferring some of that adhesion from the pad to the rotor, and then letting everything cool down and cure. So this process involves doing 5 runs at 40 miles per hour, and then slowing down moderate to aggressively to 10 miles an hour, and then without letting it cool down at all, and then doing 5 runs of 35 to 5 miles an hour on moderate braking. So again, not letting it cool down at all. And then when you're done with that, you're going to want to drive around about 40-50 miles an hour, somewhere around there. Nothing too fast, because you don't want to cool the brakes down too quick. So drive around as much as you can without stopping. The reason we want to do this without stopping is if you're in the middle of your braking procedure and you stop and you hold the brakes, you're going to create sort of a hot spot on your rotor, and so you don't want to do that. If you do need to stop for whatever reason, tap on the brakes lightly, put the car in neutral if you can, maybe pull the e-brake to hold the car in place, and then you can drive when it's safe to. Try to pick out a road that you won't need to stop, that there's not a lot of traffic. Maybe pick a time of day where you can do this, where there's not a lot of traffic. It's going to make your life a whole lot easier. So once you're done with that 5 to 10 minute cool down period, you should be good to go. You probably want to drive moderately for maybe 50 to 100 miles, just to let everything kind of settle and really break in. But you should be ready to go and just not do aggressive driving until after about that 50 to 100 miles. All right, so as you saw, the brake procedure is not all that difficult. It should take you a few hours, probably about 3 or 4, to get the whole job done. Of course, it took me a whole lot longer. It took me about 8 hours with filming to do all 4 wheels, rotors, and brakes. But that's to be expected, right? So you're looking at about 3 or 4 hour job, and then the break-in procedure, of course, that only takes probably a half an hour. Now, I only did film 1 wheel because all of them are the same. The brakes on the M Performance, they're all the same, just 2 less pistons in the rear. You have the brake sensor in the driver's side front, and then also in the passenger side rear are where your brake sensors are. The longer cable goes in the rear, the shorter one goes in the front, just because the rear has to route around a little bit. Make sure that when you do route the cable for the rear, that you remember and maybe you want to route it while the other one's still in place, just because you have movement with the shocks and things like that. So you want to make sure that nothing gets caught. Now, so far, I really like the brakes. They grab really well. They're sticky. I'm going to be sure to do a review after maybe a couple thousand miles, tell you my thoughts, tell you if there's a lot of brake dust or if there's no brake dust, which is what I'm hoping, and that's what I've been told, that there's going to be almost no brake dust, and just how they grab overall. I drive rather aggressively, so I'll be a good tester for it. Now, as always, for all the products that I reviewed, for all the tools that were used, I will make sure to put them in the link below so that you can check them out. Overall, Cquence brakes, first impressions, I really dig them. They're awesome. Now, if you found this video helpful, be sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe. And again, I'm Steve, and I want to thank you for watching F33. Thanks, take care.